Oh, just looking around a little bit. So, you guys don't have like any sort of public records index, do you?
You asked me some of the best questions. People have never asked me these questions, so I honestly don't know the answers.
That's why I'm here. Just ask some questions.
Oh, that's true. That's true. The new packet is up. The packet for the next meeting.
Oh, okay.
And that is one of the subjects on the packet. Is all public record requests will be posted up and things like that.
Okay.
But it has to go through the council to be approved first, you know.
Okay.
Part of the manager's report for this next meeting.
Interesting. I don't think that's exactly what I was talking about, but that's some good information. I don't know if they're even required at the city level. I've just seen them in county establishments here locally. But it's like just a big binder with some like general policies, last year's budget, stuff like that.
You asked for the best questions. I'm going to have Dan come out and answer those questions.
Okay.
I will learn with you.
Yeah, and again, I'm not sure if you guys are required to hold that. I'm just asking questions.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, hello again. Cool shirt, by the way. Yeah. So I'm just trying to figure out if you guys maintain any sort of public records index, big binder full of general policies, maybe last year's budget, that kind of thing.
So we have last year's budget published online. So
Okay.
we have a lot of, if you go to our website, there is a tab right in the middle that says documents and ordinances.
Okay.
If you click on that, that takes you to MuniCode, which is a company that we use to host a lot of these records.
Okay.
For example, the employee handbook that you asked for,
Yes.
it's actually in MuniCode in the policy folder.
Oh, okay.
So it's readily available.
That is readily available?
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
readily available.
Well, thank you for that.
So if you go in there, you'll find all of the published budgets.
Okay.
You'll find audits up until the last one we completed.
And that was
2020.
2020?
Yep.
Okay.
And we've got Umpqua Valley Financial right now is doing all the rest of them as we speak.
Okay.
We had a lot of problems with our last auditor.
Mm-hmm.
We've got, but all of the documentation is in there. We are going to be starting to do a public records request site.
Okay.
In the future, so that when we get a request in, we will put the request up on the website,
Mm-hmm.
and then we will publish the response to it when it's
So
completed.
all public records requests are available to the public.
Exactly.
You don't have to re-request
So
it.
I've gotten like
That's
three,
cool.
I've gotten like 3 for the recording
Uh-huh.
of the hearing that happened.
Okay.
And the first person who did it, unfortunately, had to pay for us to generate the record. But the rest of the people, now it's available. And, I feel bad for her because it clearly got sent to an attorney that then forwarded it to their client, who then forwarded it to somebody who posted it online.
Before
So,
she got it.
Before she got it,
paid
literally,
for
I was finishing the email and I saw that it was already on Facebook online. I'm like, all right, well, I'm sorry. She's already paid. I've got to send it to. I've got to complete the request.
Right.
But we're going to do that so that in the future, if somebody does go through the process and pays for the request and gets all the documentation up there, then it's
Everyone.
available to the general public.
That is awesome. I actually think that's really good stuff that you got going on there.
Yeah, we started looking at, and it was really spurred a lot by your conversation the other day. We started looking at how other municipalities handled it and how other municipalities published their information.
Okay.
And we felt that in the order to be more transparent, we would kind of emulate what some of these other large, unfortunately, they're much larger communities often.
Yeah.
Significant and substantial resources to be able to do this. But, at the end of the day, I was in IT for 23 years. I should be able to do a lot of what they're doing at a lower...
On a smaller scale.
On a smaller scale,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right. Well, the whole reason I try to do this is to promote transparency education, and I'm glad that, you guys took some of that and are trying to improve your systems.
Well, exactly. For example, on your request specifically, the first 2 items, those are relatively easy.
Okay.
One of them was on our website already. One of them's in our budget, and it's just a matter of finding it in the budget.
Okay.
The third, however, because the letters that were sent in to have some personal not that I put in there, but that they put in there, communications from their attorneys and other identifying information. Those have to be reviewed so that that personal information can be redacted. And unfortunately, that's something that, well, we've waived the cost of us collecting all those records. We can't waive the attorney's cost because it's a third-party cost. So, and because of the number of records that are there and having to go through every single page to ensure that we don't release somebody's information that is redacted under Oregon records.
Right, you guys can't violate somebody else's civil rights by giving out their personal information.
So we have to go through, and unfortunately, that's where it has to be the attorney, and it ends up being something that the attorney has to go through line by line, and that's a cost that we get, and we just pass that along.
Yeah, and I get there's legal steps that we do have to follow here. I totally get that.
I will say that a lot of those letters have been published online by some of the participants, and so they're readily available. If you talk to some of those people online, you can get a lot of those same letters, because then we have no responsibility to their public information.
Right. And, part of it is, for me, the assurity that nothing was edited in between what you got and what they're giving me.
Yeah.
So I just want to...
We my staff is very thorough. They scan the envelopes. I mean, they don't leave a single thing out. And the council or whomever gets the complaint letters, they see everything there.
Okay.
And that's very important to us. It's very important that it doesn't matter how false, derogatory, insulting, whatever. If it's a message about me, that's a complaint about me, my council sees everything.
Okay.
We got a very harsh message the other day from a gentleman who comes to our meetings, and I passed it directly along. And unfortunately, the thing that a lot of people aren't understanding is public record is public record.
Yes.
There are a lot of people who don't understand when you send something into the city, it's not the property of the council member who receives it. It's the property of the city.
No, I'm
Has
aware.
to go through a process, and as much as it says personal and confidential or don't give this to this person, it's not how it works. It's a public record. It has to go through the same process that everything else does.
I can understand that.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a private communication to the mayor. You can have a private coffee with them and have a conversation.
Right.
But any written communication becomes property of the city. We have a retention requirement on it for so long.
It's there in black and white.
And we end up just having to keep it.
All right. I get it. I'm not necessarily with the other groups that you're dealing with. I am my own individual and my own entity here. But with that, so have we come to the understanding that we can do records requests anonymously? No.
So I reached out to multiple different city managers who have been doing this for 30 years. It is entirely dependent on city policy.
Really?
The Attorney General says that, it has a list of entities that can produce it, and it is city policy of whether they will accept an anonymous request or not. And in Walport's case, we follow the law very carefully. One of the laws actually requires checking whether the person who has submitted a request is part of a protected party that would then have to do a couple other steps in order to reproduce or to collect the request. And so therefore, we do not allow an anonymous request. Some other entities do. I can't speak to what their attorney advised them or why they chose to do so, but the way that we read the law right now, an anonymous request doesn't allow the city to verify that that person is not of that protected class that would have to do an additional step.
So from my perspective, what it seems to me is that you're worried about people requesting information that are not actually involved with these lawsuits that you have, but are requesting information outside of that.
So if somebody is, say, involved in a lawsuit, a civil claim, or some other issue with the city, and say we know them as only Company X, for example, but a citizen who is involved with the lawsuit from Company X comes and requests that information, they have to produce additional records to our attorney before a records request can be processed.
Right. If there is a tort claim, or I forget what section of lawsuit was filed, then it has to be submitted not only to you, but also the city attorney, which is typically the attorney general, or?
No. The city attorney is a specifically contracted city from the city.
Okay.
And so those requests can generate additional costs for the requester.
Gotcha.
Which is why we just say, and again, I don't. Based on the information that I received, I don't really understand how other jurisdictions are accepting anonymous requests, because based on that, they could be violating the tort laws involved in whatever their issue is.
To my understanding, it kind of depends on the information being requested. If it's general information, there is no need to have my name.
Well,
now then, if it's getting very specific, and then you have to go through, make sure that you're not releasing information of private parties, that might be a different thing.
The main thing on our behalf
Yes.
is, I just take your paper. I don't pay any attention to what it's requesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't personally know if it was something I wouldn't need a name for. You know what I'm saying?
Right, right.
yeah,
And
so
It makes it easier as an employee to say, yes, I'll take this, and if you want a copy of it, we will email it back to you saying that we have it.
now then, it would seem to me that until you have established the need to protect a protected party, or how'd you phrase it?
So unfortunately, you can't do it that way. You have to have a blanket policy.
Mm-hmm.
And so what our blanket policy is, and again, it's up to each municipality and each public entity to determine their policy.
Mm-hmm.
And Oregon law actually specifies that municipalities, cities can specify their policy for collecting a public record. In our case, our policy states specifically that we'll collect a name, and either an email address or an address is required.
Okay.
And that's simply because we have to have some way of contacting you back. So if you produce a public record request with your name and, for example, just a physical address and no email address, we will only mail that response back.
Yep, I follow.
And vice versa. If we get one that's only an email address, such as yours, we will email that record back. Or, as in your case, I actually requested, is it okay for us to email the record? Because some people's emails, some of these records are large. If you email a 20 megabyte file to them, it can create a lot of problems.
Right. Yeah, then you have to actually use a third-party resource to file
Exactly.
share something.
No,
Yeah.
Exactly. So, for example, the audio recordings. The audio recordings of these meetings are huge.
Yeah, about an hour long.
And so we actually use Dropbox to send them out, because anything else, we couldn't get the
Right.
message to somebody in that size.
Okay. Well, you have a very interesting interpretation of the law that I severely disagree with, and I think raises some very big civil rights issues, that mainly being that we as individuals of this country need to be free of fear of retaliation from our government.
I don't necessarily disagree with you. I just know that right now, the idea that asking for information should not, lead to a retaliation action. But if you look at the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, if you look at the Oregon State Bar, if you look at these other government entities, they all request that if you file a complaint, if you file, a records issue with them, you are required to provide name and address and that contact information. So, whereas I understand you disagree, and it's absolutely fair to disagree, that is the city's interpretation of the law as it stands right now, and based on the case law that we've found, that will continue to be policy for the near future.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. Now, you're wrong. I'm going to tell you that. You're wrong. It is going to boil out, and you are going to be wrong.
That's a matter for the courts, not for me.
And that's where it's going to probably go. All right. Well, thank you for the conversation. I will email you back about the handbook and just to formalize it and everything. But I appreciate you sending me in the right direction here verbally.
If you email me back and just say, I've looked at the three, I'm responding to this one, I'm deciding on number 3, but on number 1 and 2, please provide those. Those are there's no cost associated with those. It's relatively trivial because they're both available effectively on our website.
Gotcha. So, yeah, and just so I can clear something up in my own head here, is it fair to assume that you pulled my name off of Facebook?
No, we received your name from a third party.
From a third party?
Yep. Somebody who recognized you, from the community.
And is that going to be in any sort of formal communication, or was that verbal?
From that person, that was verbal.
That was verbal. Okay. Interesting. All right. Well, I don't think I have any more questions for you. I appreciate your time.
Hey, not a problem.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah.